Hey everyone, Matthew Mercer from Lucos Tactical, and today I'm excited to bring you a really cool product from SSVi. Now, if you're not familiar with SSVi, they are all about custom Glock work. Damon Young, the founder of that company, is just phenomenal when it comes to custom Glock work. I'm talking grip stippling jobs, custom mill work, and cuts on your slide. Just awesome work on your Glock. So if you're into that type of thing, no doubt that you've heard of SSVi. But what I want to talk about is a trigger from SSVi, and it's a drop-in trigger group for your Glock handgun, and it is the TYR trigger. I'm not Nordic, so forgive me if my Nordic god pronunciation is inaccurate, but I'm going to go with TYR. But TYR trigger from SSVi. Now, it's a drop-in trigger for your Glock. Now, if this video goes along with the article I wrote, and in the article I kind of explain my philosophy on aftermarket, modifications and enhancements to your everyday carry gun. Now, just real quick, my philosophy is just, if you're gonna do something to your everyday carry gun, it should be function related. It should produce a net positive where the gun functions better, it is more reliable, it is safer, it allows you to shoot better with it, something that produces a net positive as far as the way the gun functions. Okay. And that just comes, I shot stock Glocks for the past 15 years because of my police department. We were issued Glocks. We weren't allowed to modify them at all. And I just trained and got used to that standard factory Glock, the trigger pull and everything. And gradually I got, I changed sights. I got a little bit of different sights and things like that, but I never tinkered around with the trigger. And especially I never wanted to mess around with the trigger pull weight. I never had a reason to go from a 5.5 pound trigger pull weight that Glock makes standard on their guns. And I trained with it, and it just was fine for me. So I never really wanted to change that. But when I started researching, all the rave about aftermarket Glock triggers and how great it makes the trigger feel, I came across SSVi, and I was looking at the trigger, and what intrigued me and what I liked the best, just right off the bat, was that the trigger does not change the pull weight, and it uses the factory trigger bar. Okay, so everything that it does while keeping the standards or the specifications as if it were from the factory. So, for example, the trigger pull weight is still 5.5 pounds. The trigger bar is the same. The way the trigger safety works is exactly the same. So, some of these triggers, aftermarket triggers, you can really tinker around with them and customize them a lot. Some of them you can even change the amount of play that you have in that safety and everything. But you have to be careful, because some of those actually say, for competition use only, or recommended for competition use, and these types of things. So, and for me, I'm an everyday carrier. I'm a self-defense minded shooter. And so I want it to function in my everyday carry gun, and that's why I liked the SSVi trigger initially. When I looked at it, and I'm one of those people that, as long as it functions, I don't care. I don't care what it looks like. I want it to work. But it's a nice benefit to have something that looks really slick. Now, here is the TYR trigger from SSVi. Now, I'm going to clear my Glock 27. There's nothing in the chamber and nothing in the magazine well. But here is my TYR trigger from SSVi. Now, it is the special edition Republican red, which I think looks really sharp with the black trigger safety there. Okay, so there is the TYR trigger. And like I said, this definitely changes the game as far as Glock triggers. I've been a factory standard Glock trigger shooter for, like I said, about 15 years. And I love the reliability of the Glocks coming out of the box. Trigger feels good, as far as a factory trigger. I felt other triggers that are better, without a doubt. But I trained with it, and I thought it was totally acceptable and totally fine. But the complaint that a lot of people have with the Glock trigger is that it does feel a little mushy. Okay, a little mushy when it breaks, and that creep, what I refer to as creep, and that is not this take up, this initial movement of the trigger, but once you get that initial take up and it starts to move that sear and it starts to get ready to release the striker and have that shot break, that part needs to be crisp. And what the TYR trigger does is it crisps, it makes it super crisp, takes away that mushy feeling and makes it super crisp. And additionally, what it does is, and I'll try to show you, I have the trigger back and I'm going to reset, I'm going to recock it, and watch where it resets. It is super short reset, and so it allows you to have a minimal reset, real crisp reset, and a real quick crisp break without that creep and mushy feeling. So really, really cool design, because it changes the way the gun or the trigger feels. Okay, without, a lot of people get wrapped up around trigger pull weight, and they're trying to lighten it up, and they're missing that a lot of that feel that you get out of a good trigger is not just because it's super light, it's because it is crisp, because it's responsive. And that's where this trigger excels, and in my opinion it shines, because it doesn't, you're using the same exact components as Glock, except you're changing the trigger shoe. And this is your trigger shoe, okay? So here's your standard Glock trigger shoe, okay? That's where your finger rests, and you actually start pulling the trigger, right? Well, look at the difference in the shape of these two, okay? You can see the TYR trigger is flatter, okay? The safety is a little bit different as far as where it comes out on the trigger, right? This comes out, the safety starts out a little bit further towards the top, and this is more towards the middle of the trigger, okay? But a big difference in the shape of the trigger, okay? In the shape. That's how the trigger changes the feel, by utilizing leverage and changing the feel, and giving you more leverage with this design over this. It's not about lightening up the trigger. It's an amazing design, okay? And not only does it change or crisp, make the break crisper, the reset feels shorter, but it's wider. It's wider here. So when you get your finger on that trigger, it feels amazing. It really does. And this is coming from somebody who, I'm telling you, 15 years of shooting this and saying nothing's ever going to pry this out of my finger. I got this on there, and it is amazing. It really was amazing to shoot this trigger and to feel this trigger, and know that it was doing all of that without lightening the pull, without changing any of the internals at all. Kind of blew my mind, to be honest with you. Of course, you're saying, this trigger is going to feel better than their standard Glock trigger. Standard Glock trigger is garbage, everything like that. Okay, I also have an Apex trigger here. Now, you're probably familiar with Apex. They're very well known, make custom parts and things, especially for Glocks. And their trigger groups are really popular. A lot of people have these Apex triggers. And I actually shot the Apex trigger before I shot this SSVi trigger. And I put about 200 rounds with this, and this trigger, this Apex trigger, also uses just your standard Glock trigger bar as well. So I shot about 200 rounds with this, shot about 200 rounds with this, and Lord knows how many with the standard trigger shoe. And it really boils down to, and what the reason why I brought this out is because of course it's going to blow your standard trigger shoe out of the water, because it's designed to do that. This is standard equipment. But what about side by side against a well-known, really popular Apex trigger? Now, Apex makes really good stuff. There's nothing wrong with this trigger, and I actually, when I started shooting it, I liked it a lot. But I want to show you a couple different differences between the two triggers. Now, you can see the Apex trigger, the safety is much larger. Okay, it's a larger safety, and more importantly, or as important, is the shape. Now, look at the flatness of the Apex trigger compared to the SSVi trigger. Okay, and I'm holding this down so you can actually see the shape of the trigger shoe itself. It's a larger trigger, okay, in size, and it is flatter, much flatter. And the reason why I point that out is because some people really like flat triggers. Some people shoot 3-gun competitions and they have a flat trigger in their rifle or whatnot, and they're used to that. And flat triggers are really nice because it feels nice on your finger. But I liked the SSVi trigger, the curve of it, because what the curve does is it kind of centers your finger. It kind of pushes it to a certain point where it wants it to be to get the maximum leverage on that trigger. Whereas on a flat trigger, it's sometimes a little bit harder to get the same exact trigger placement or finger placement on the trigger. Nothing bad. It's just a feel thing. It's just how things feel to you. Do you like a flat trigger or a more curved trigger? Totally personal preference. They're both very wide and feel good on the finger, as opposed to a more narrow standard trigger. Okay, so both the SSVi and the Apex trigger, wide and felt really good on the finger. This safety is larger and it feels different on your finger. So, and that is also going to be a personal preference thing. I kind of liked having the really small, minimalistic safety that still works just fine in just the way it's designed, but it didn't feel as pronounced on my finger as this one did. But once again, just a personal preference. You might like that feel better. As far as the way it functioned, I felt like the SSVi had a slightly shorter reset than the Apex trigger, and that might just be a perception thing of the way it feels. It might, I didn't put a caliper on there and actually measure the reset distance, but it felt a little bit shorter. Okay, as far as the break, the crispness of the break or lack of creep and whatnot, they both performed outstanding. I mean, this trigger, breaks unbelievably well, just like the SSVi. And truth be told, the reset on the Apex, not just because I said it felt shorter than or longer than the SSVi, is not a long reset. When you compare it to the standard Glock, it will definitely like blow your mind and say, wow, if you're shooting an Apex, you'll be like, oh wow, that is definitely an improvement on the reset and on the break. But I felt that, and maybe like I said, it could just be a perception thing, but I just felt that this reset was a little bit shorter. But it's just a personal preference thing, and maybe it's just the color I liked it better. I don't know, but no, honestly, it just felt like it was a little bit shorter of a reset. But all in all, really boils down to personal preference. There is nothing wrong with Apex and some of the other companies out there. But what I want to point out is a very important factor for me is that because I'm a self-defense shooter, like I said, there are many companies that make aftermarket triggers, and Apex has been around and they make a quality product. And if you're going to put it in a self-defense gun, you want to make sure that that thing works. And it's not likely that a trigger, provided you put it in the right way, it's not likely that a trigger itself is going to cause a malfunction, right? I mean, it is what a trigger, it is what it is. But, it is good to know that, it didn't feel, now I put, like I said, around 200 rounds through this, it doesn't feel any looser. The pins don't feel like they're moving out or anything like that. And it doesn't look compromised. So those are things that, I look at and say, is this thing going to hold up and can I rely on this if I need this? On a competition, if you have a malfunction, okay, it's not life or death, but I want this thing to work. And I was very satisfied that this thing is not going to, malfunction, shoot a couple rounds and it looks cool, but it just falls apart, right? So just when you're looking at modifications or enhancements to your everyday carry, and this kind of expands off of this, but just make sure that the product is a reliable product. And SSVi, they make good quality stuff, and the TYR trigger is no exception. So one more time, the TYR trigger from SSVi, check them out, ssvi.com. Really, really unbelievable product. And even for a guy who is so hesitant to make changes to his firearm, I put this in there and blew me away. So I'm sure you will be pleased too. So check them out, SSVi TYR trigger.
I changed my grip dramatically.
But he could still have it in his car anyway.
What happens is you memorize that position.
Awesome experience working with each one of these guys.